My dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure, I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Why wait to see if you'll get something you like this Valentine's Day when you can go to BlueNile.com and find something you'll love? Whether you're looking to treat yourself to a little winter sparkle or show a galentine how much you appreciate them, Blue Nile offers a wide selection of high-quality designs, expert guidance, and free 30-day returns for the ultimate peace of mind. You can even design your own jewelry. Right now, save up to 50% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
Welcome back to Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the power and the meaning of the most important story in business. The one that answers why somebody would buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. This is the story that defines the very character and nature of an organization. At WordWrite, we call that your capital S story. And once again today, in this episode, I have the opportunity to be the guest because my talented colleague, Tara D'Orazio, is going to play host. Tara.
Thanks, Paul, our Chief Storyteller here at WordWrite. Chapters with Paul, this is what we're calling this series. And if you missed our last episode, we talked about social media and storytelling. Today, we're going to focus on story archetypes. Archetypes is probably a word that when you're hearing it, you're thinking, I know this from somewhere. Did I learn this in English class, in high school? We kind of know what it is, but to refresh everyone's memory, what is an archetype, Paul?
I think the simple way to describe it, Tara, is it's a story model of different kinds of stories. So the one that I always use as an example is David and Goliath. You don't have to be a biblical scholar to know that the David and Goliath archetypal story is the little guy takes down the big guy. And that is quite frequently an archetype that we see in business, where there's a startup company that comes into an established industry and takes on the giant and knocks him off.
So why are these important, and why as a business? Because, someone might think, well, that's just a story. That's just something in literature. That doesn't have anything to do with my day-to-day business operations. How can an archetype, or knowing what your business archetype is, play into your strategy and your communications?
That's a great question. Everything we do in business today, in marketing and PR, uses tools like this podcast that weren't around at the time that our brains were created. Our brains are old. And research has shown over the years, and not in marketing, but in sociology, psychology, hard sciences, that our brains are hardwired for story. At WordWrite, a few of the main taproots for our work are that work that was done by Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst. And I love this story. During World War I, Jung was in Switzerland. And during World War I and World War II, for you history buffs, Switzerland was a neutral country. And what that meant was it was a safe place for people to come to flee the war. And while he was practicing during this time period, Jung realized that regardless of economic attainment, education, language, culture, the people he was seeing as patients all had the same dreams, the same nightmares. This led him to create this concept he called the collective unconscious, which is really one main taproot for the concept of archetypal stories. Another taproot for us at WordWrite is the work of the mythologist Joseph Campbell. Now, when the Star Wars movies were done, and I don't know, Tara, we've never talked about whether or not you're...
I've seen them.
Okay, all right, you've seen them, good. George Lucas, who made those films, sat down with Campbell because he wanted to understand from Campbell a very important archetypal story. It's known as the hero's journey. Campbell wrote about it in his book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. I love this story too. Campbell may be one of the most famous academics never to get a PhD. During the Depression, when he wanted to get a PhD, there was no university that would take him. Instead, he got a fellowship, he went to Europe, and he basically traveled the world. And what he discovered was very similar to what Jung discovered. Regardless of education, economic attainment, culture, everywhere he went in the world, he discovered people were telling the same stories over and over again. And that led him to the concept of the hero's journey. And the Star Wars films, especially those that focus on the journey of Luke Skywalker, trace the kind of hero's journey that Campbell had in mind that he wrote about. And we see a lot of that in marketing and PR today.
Right. You mentioned David Goliath, and everyone knows that's the underdog story. What are some other archetypes that we should be aware of? And maybe even mention, since WordWrite does this work and we've done it for ourselves, what are our archetypes here at WordWrite?
And I think we'll try and put this in the show notes for you folks so that you can see it. In sociology, psychology, and in marketing, there is a tool that's used called an archetype wheel. And there are basically 12 of the most common families. Some of them have different names based upon who's putting together the archetype wheel. But they describe the basic types of archetypal stories you'll find and the heroes that you'll find. So an example would be the judge or the ruler. And to give you an example of a brand that fits that, Google. Okay, when we get on the internet and we search, at least for now, we'll see what AI does. We don't search, we Google, right? So the idea of that archetype is it's the individual or the organization that sets the standards for everybody else. Amazon in certain ways could be considered that kind of an archetype as well. We have the jester. Now you don't often see that in business, but sometimes we have companies that we like just because they're funny and they have a sense of humor. We have the everyman, the lover, the caregiver. I could go on, but I think you get the idea that as you can think about different characters in your own life or from literature or pop culture or movies, there are ways to use the same kinds of archetypes to tell stories in business.
So we do this work here with our clients at WordWrite through our StoryCrafting process. And businesses come to us and we work with them so they can determine their archetype.
Yes.
Now, in that process, sometimes they find they're more than one.
Yes.
Is that okay? And how does that work as they then develop messaging through that?
That is absolutely critical, actually. And when we typically work with a client, what we're looking for are to identify the top 3 archetypes that they might represent. Now, there are characteristics and behaviors of these archetypal characters or stories, and we work with our clients to align those. Take healthcare, for example. You know, everybody in healthcare is a caregiver of some flavor. We've had the opportunity to work with companies that deal with medical ambulance services. Look, if you don't have an ambulance that gets there, then you're not going to save somebody's life, perhaps. So they're caregivers, right? But they're not the same kind of caregiver as a brain surgeon. So you really do need to combine probably 2, sometimes maybe 3 archetypes to create a unique storyline that describes your organization.
So everyone's thinking, all right, so I'm this everyman or I'm this caregiver. What does that really mean? How do I then take that knowledge and translate it into marketing, into PR, into advertising? Where does it fit into the strategy?
That's a great question, Tara. Let's dig into that right after this quick break.
My dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure, I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
All right, folks, we're back on Storylines Live, and in this episode, we're talking about archetypes. And we were just about to dig into the subject of how to take an archetype and translate it into your company's story before the break. So, Tara, it's a great question. People, for example, we worked with an accounting firm a few years ago, and we determined that they were the sage. Now, the sage is, if you think about pop culture or historical fiction, think of Merlin or Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. It's an all-knowing, right? So we worked with this accounting firm, and they were in a particularly narrow niche business in accounting, and they thought maybe they should get out of it. So we did our process and determined that they were actually one of the leaders in that particular segment of the business. In fact, we determined they were the sage. And one of the capstone moments was in working with our client and interviewing them and going through our process, we learned that there was a federal regulation that came out that affected their clients. The top federal government official was supposed to speak at a conference and couldn't be there because of illness. The federal government called their client up and said, "Our guy can't speak, will you speak?" Now, when the hand of authority reaches down and says, "If not for us, you know more about this than anybody else in the world," that's really 2 thumbs up on your archetype. Now, accountants do not wander the face of the earth saying, "Hi, I'm a sage, please hire me."
Right.
So the important thing about your archetype in your story as an organization, profit or nonprofit, it's the fuel in the engine, right? It is not exactly what people are buying. They are engaging with you based upon how you share your story and what your story is. But you don't necessarily go up to people and say, "This is my archetype and this is why you should work with me."
Right. So it's important to know what it is, but then that's kind of a background to then what
Yes.
you're going to do with it. And it might not seem like something that you would think you would need to know, but as we've done this with clients, once they kind of see it from that different perspective, it really does help them and help us work with them to create really different messages and material that really connects with their audience, because not every business is for every person. So it's really specific to that. Speaking of that, and this word gets overused, but it really is what it is, how do you remain authentic in doing this? There's a lot of sages out there, or everymans, or caregivers.
Right.
How do you then take knowing that and put your own, really personal spin into it?
I always use this example, Tara, that doesn't come from business, but I think it's the human experience that's relatable. If you and I are downtown and we're going to have lunch, and you get across the intersection and I don't, and we see an accident happen, and the police come and they interview us, you had one perspective on the accident, I had another.
Right.
Am I a liar and you're a truth teller? Am I a truth teller and you're a liar? No. Here's the business corollary. Your customers or clients or prospects expect that if there is more than one organization that does what you do, that there are going to be different viewpoints. In fact, they expect it. As long as the story you are sharing is authentic, which means rooted in fact and true to yourself, you're going to be fine. But that's one of 3 critical pillars that we see in storytelling. Your story needs to be authentic, it needs to be shared by a fluent storyteller, and you have to continually ensure that you're engaging the audience.
Great. I think to wrap this up, can you tell us what WordWrite's archetypes are and how you started using that as a basis for some of your story crafting process work?
That's excellent. So when we first moved into the building that we're in now, we're in the old Alcoa building in downtown Pittsburgh, we went through this process and we named our 3 conference rooms at the time after our archetypes. Number 1 is the explorer, and that is our primary archetype because we were always trying new things and trying to be on the front edge of everything for our clients. Hence why we've talked about in this series, social media and storytelling, because everybody's thinking about that these days. Our second archetype was the champion. Now, champion not in the sense of I've got gold medals around my neck, look at me, but in the sense of we work with our clients and help champion their story and their interests. So those were the top two. And then the third was the outlaw. And the reason why we picked the outlaw is because we don't do things the way a lot of other agencies do.
Right.
And that's to the benefit of our clients, and also to the people who work here.
Great. Well, I've certainly learned a lot. I hope our audience has as well. If you have more questions on archetypes, what they are, how we can determine what your archetype is for your business and work with you during our story crafting process, reach out to us. You can go to wordwriteagency.com, follow us on social media, find Paul on LinkedIn, find myself on LinkedIn, connect with us any way that's out there. We're happy to chat with you about your story and your business and how we can help you deliver results for your clients.
And we're glad you were with us for this episode of Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the power and the meaning of the most important story in business. The one that answers why somebody would buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. Thanks for being here, folks. We'll see you next time.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Hennika Watkins-Porter hosts The Entrepreneurial You, empowering entrepreneurs with insights on leadership, business, and success. Hennika, tell listeners what to expect from your show.
So we provide innovative business strategies and practical solutions to common entrepreneurial challenges.
And where can people subscribe?
Find us at hennikawatkisporter.com, as well as the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcasts.net, or search for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.